It was the sweltering summer of 1897 in the quiet little town of Brookhaven, Missouri. The days dragged on beneath a merciless sun, and the nights were thick with silence, broken only by the hum of crickets and the distant cry of a lone dog wandering down dusty, empty roads. Life here moved slowly. Farmers tilled their land from dawn until dusk. Children ran barefoot through the dirt, and women sat on front porches trading gossip about neighbors, husbands, and the latest scandal. On the surface, everything appeared normal, peaceful even, but beneath that calm facade, something dark was quietly taking root. His name was Samuel Whitlock. To most folks, he was simply another boy, sickly pale, slender, with eyes far too big for his narrow face. He was only 14, yet there was something unsettling about him, a constant half-smile that seemed carved into his features. It wasn't warm or friendly, it felt fixed, unnatural, like it belonged to someone who knew a secret no one else did. Neighbors often murmured after seeing him stroll silently along the cornfield edges, his small silhouette brushing against rustling stalks, that eerie smile unmoving. At first, no one thought much of it. Every town had its odd ones, its outcasts. But Samuel's strangeness was heavier, like a chill that lingered after he left. Adults exchanged uneasy glances and whispered, "There's something not right about that boy." Samuel lived alone with his mother in a decaying farmhouse at the town's edge. His father had vanished years before. Some claimed he'd run off, others said he'd died in a brawl. Whatever the truth, no one cared to ask. Everyone could see the Whitlocks were falling apart, their house crumbling, their porch paint flaking like old skin. His mother, Martha, was a wary woman, holding their lives together by threads, her nights spent trying to calm the strange moods of her peculiar son. Teachers called Samuel bright but distracted, always staring out the window, doodling grim sketches, knives, bleeding figures, in the corners of his papers. When classmates asked why, he'd tilt his head, still smiling, and answer softly, "Because it feels right." His cruelty began small with animals. Pets disappeared around Brookhaven: cats, stray dogs, chickens. People blamed wild predators, but the truth was far more sinister. Behind the Whitlock barn, where weeds grew tall and children rarely played, Samuel performed quiet, methodical experiments, his steady hands dissecting life itself, blood soaking the soil beneath his shoes. Those who caught glimpses of him afterward swore his grin had grown sharper, hungrier, as though he drew pleasure from what he'd done. No one then could imagine how deep that darkness ran. Brookhaven had known petty crimes and barroom fights, but not murder, not the kind that stains history. That changed one June morning. 11-year-old Thomas Green's body was found near the woods behind the church, throat slashed, chest carved with deliberate wounds. Father O'Connell, the parish priest, discovered the child at dawn, his body laid out with eerie care, arms crossed over his chest. Even hardened men went pale at the sight. Yet what unsettled the town most wasn't the act, but what followed. Children whispered that Samuel had been smiling wider than ever the night before, watching Thomas play, silent and still, as if he already knew what fate awaited. Suspicion turned toward him quickly, though proof was scarce, and his age made it hard to believe. Parents pulled their children indoors, doors locked before sunset, fear thick as smoke. But Samuel walked among them unchanged, his smile never fading, eyes following every movement. The sheriff brought him in for questioning. Seated calmly, Samuel spoke with eerie politeness, denying everything. When asked about Thomas, he leaned forward, smile stretching just a little wider, and said quietly, "I see lots of people. Some of them I never forget." Unnerved, the sheriff let him go. There was no evidence. Yet deep down, everyone in Brookhaven knew the truth Samuel had hidden behind that grin. He had killed Thomas Green, and worse, he had enjoyed it. That was only the beginning. The town didn't yet realize that fear would soon consume them. Each passing week would see Samuel grow bolder, his axe darker, his fascination with death evolving from curiosity to pure horror. His name would soon be etched into Missouri's grim history, not just as a murderer, but as the boy who smiled while killing. When the next body appeared, no prayer, no locked door, could stop the terror that had already begun. The discovery of Thomas Green's body broke something in Brookhaven. The freedom children once had vanished overnight. Parents spoke in hushed voices, and even the most mundane errands carried unease. Inside the general store, whispers floated between shelves. Who could do such a thing? Why? At church, Father O'Connell's sermons turned grim, the phrase, "of all among us," echoing louder each Sunday. Though no one dared say it outright, suspicion had already settled firmly on Samuel Whitlock. The strange boy was now something else entirely. A walking reminder that innocence had left Brookhaven. He still wandered the dirt roads, his boots kicking dust, that smile, unchanged, unshaken, growing somehow colder under their fearful eyes. And when people looked away, Samuel looked right back, studying them as though he were already imagining what they looked like on the inside. His glassy, distant stare unnerved the townsfolk so deeply that parents began clutching their children closer whenever his shadow appeared along the street. Windows shut earlier each evening, and every barking dog in the night sent families jolting awake, imagining that Samuel's grin was waiting just beyond the pane. Sheriff Elias Turner, a man in his 50s weathered by years of farm work before joining law enforcement, could feel the tension closing in. He had seen drunken brawls and the aftermath of bandit raids, but nothing compared to the grotesque sight of young Thomas Green. Turner could no longer ignore what nearly everyone already suspected. Yet the law was a cage he could not break, and suspicion alone was never enough to confine a boy. So he watched, quietly. He spoke to neighbors, asking where Samuel wandered at night, and noted his strange habits at school. He kept his distance but never looked away, though it seemed Samuel somehow sensed the scrutiny. The boy left no trace, no evidence, only the unease that lingered in every place he had been. One humid evening, beneath the fading glow of gas lamps, Turner spotted him seated by the creek, idly dragging a stick through the dark water. As the sheriff's boots sank into the muddy bank, Samuel didn't move. Didn't even glance up. Then, in that soft, detached voice of his, he said, "You all think I killed him." The sheriff froze, startled by the calmness of the statement. "Why would you say that, son?" Turner asked. Only then did Samuel tilt his head, turning that ever-present smile toward him. "Because you're right," he whispered, pausing before adding through clenched teeth. "But you'll never prove it." Turner's stomach turned to ice. Was it a confession, or just the cruel imagination of a disturbed child? Before he could respond, Samuel stood, brushed the dirt from his pants and walked away, leaving the sheriff standing speechless by the water, certain he'd just been marked by someone who knew exactly how untouchable he was. Panic gripped Brookhaven soon after when another child vanished. 9-year-old Abigail Monroe never returned home one cloudless July afternoon. Her frantic mother went door to door, calling her name, until half the town joined the search with lanterns and trembling voices. Just past midnight they found her. Hidden deep in the cornfields, Abigail's small body bore the same deliberate wounds as Thomas Green's. Her blood had soaked into the soil, leaving dark stains that the farmers would never forget. What horrified them most wasn't just the brutality. It was the precision. Each cut had purpose. Whoever did it acted with patience, with skill, and with an understanding of suffering that no ordinary person could possess. Suspicion again fell squarely on Samuel, but this time whispers didn't stay whispers. Mothers cried his name with trembling lips, and fathers met under lamplight, debating what must be done if the law failed to act. Some demanded Samuel be driven out of Brookhaven entirely. Others muttered of harsher justice. But Samuel seemed untouched by it all. Days after Abigail's funeral, he appeared near her home, silent, watching the grieving family from a distance. Neighbors claimed they saw that same smile creep back onto his face as he observed their pain, eyes tracing their tears with an almost hungry fascination. One woman, Mrs. Dale, swore she confronted him. Furious and broken, she demanded to know if he was responsible. Samuel leaned close enough for her to smell the iron on his breath and murmured, "Why ask me when you already know?" That one sentence spread faster than fire in dry grass. Fear hardened into dread. Brookhaven was no longer merely frightened of Samuel Whitlock. They believed he fed on their fear. His presence wasn't just unsettling anymore, it was a threat. Yet nothing and no one could touch him. Sheriff Turner had no witnesses, no proof, only trembling children and terrified rumors. Without evidence, the law's hands were tied. And so Samuel remained free, roaming the streets with that ghostly grin, his very existence a cruel reminder that the nightmare was still unfolding. The summer dragged on, each sunset steeped in dread over who might disappear next. Parents forbade their children to play beyond sight. Farmers kept shotguns at hand, not for coyotes, but for the pale boy who haunted their roads. And still, Samuel walked among them, silent and smiling, as doors shut and men crossed the street to avoid his gaze. Some said he'd been born wrong. Others blamed his father's absence or his mother's wary neglect. But the truth was simpler. Samuel didn't just kill, he enjoyed it. And he wanted everyone to know he did. His cruelty was sharpening, not fading. By the end of that summer, Brookhaven wouldn't whisper about the missing anymore. They would speak of the dead. Samuel Whitlock, the boy who smiled while killing, was only beginning. By late July, the murders of Thomas Green and Abigail Munro had turned Brookhaven into a fortress of fear. Families bolted doors before dusk. Fathers stood guard on porches, rifles balanced on their knees. Children were kept within arm's reach, their laughter smothered by silence. Yet fear lingered like a shadow, because Samuel Whitlock still walked among them. When people crossed his path, they avoided his eyes, but they could feel them, cold and watchful. His smile never faltered. Every tilt of his head seemed to suggest he already knew what they whispered in the dark. He was no longer a boy in their eyes, but a sickness wearing human skin, a curse with a child's face. His killings carried a rhythm now, a pattern. Weeks separated each one, always a child, always marked with the same deliberate cruelty. These were not acts of impulse. They were calculated. Sheriff Turner spent sleepless nights at his desk, scribbling notes and sketches in a worn ledger under flickering candlelight, the sweat beading on his brow. Every fiber of him screamed Samuel's guilt, yet it was like staring at a hanging rope's shadow. You could see the shape of the horror, but never catch the rope itself. Turner could see the pattern, but couldn't yet touch it, like smoke slipping through his fingers. Then came the third killing, and denial was no longer possible. In August, under another suffocating sunset, 12-year-old Henry Lawson left the little schoolhouse after helping his teacher tidy up. He never made it home. By dawn his body was discovered inside the old Miller barn. The scene mirrored Thomas and Abigail's deaths, but this time there was something new, something worse. Carved across the boy's chest was a shallow, deliberate curve, a grotesque imitation of a grin. When Sheriff Turner saw it, his stomach turned. He didn't need to be told what it was. The killer had left his signature, a smile. That grisly mark changed everything. The town's fears, once scattered whispers, now solidified into a single dreadful truth. Brookhaven wasn't dealing with a killer for pleasure alone. They were dealing with someone who wanted to be seen, who wanted to make his message known. These weren't random slayings, they were performances. And Samuel Whitlock was the playwright. When questioned, Samuel claimed he'd been home with his mother that night. Martha Whitlock, hollow-eyed and trembling, confirmed it, yet Turner saw the fear in her silence. A woman protecting her son not out of love, but out of terror. In the days that followed, she was often seen standing on their porch, wringing her hands, her face pale and drawn, flinching each time Samuel disappeared into the night. She never spoke a word, but her eyes confessed more than she ever could. She feared the monster her child had become. Once again Samuel walked free, and with no proof to hold him, his confidence swelled. By the end of August, no one bothered whispering his name anymore. Whitlock was spat like poison. Men cursed it. Women clutched their children tighter at its mention. Still, Samuel seemed to feed off their disgust. He strolled through the town square as if daring them to stop him, his step slow, his stare deliberate, his smile always there, taunting. Then came the moment that burned itself into Brookhaven's memory. One blistering afternoon, Samuel entered the crowded marketplace. The noise around him faltered as people noticed him weaving through the crowd with that serene, unsettling calm. His grin widened as he passed between them, and a suffocating quiet settled over the square. Then, in a voice soft but sharp enough to slice through the air, he said, "3 and counting." The words were spoken casually, almost playfully, but they sent a chill through everyone who heard them. A butcher's cleaver fell from his hand. Mothers clutched their children. Samuel's smile lingered a heartbeat longer before he turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like the air itself had been drained from the street. The sheriff's office erupted that evening. Furious fathers stormed through the doors, demanding justice. From the pulpit, the town preacher thundered that the devil himself had taken root inside the boy. Yet Samuel remained untouchable, never arrested, never even detained. Turner knew the truth. Without evidence, locking him up would only ignite chaos. If he jailed the boy without proof, some would break him out in outrage, and others would storm the building to kill him themselves. Brookhaven was a fragile thing now, and Turner was terrified of being the one to shatter it. So Samuel remained free, and worse, he was evolving. The pauses between murders grew shorter, the cruelty deepened. Each body showed more precision, more control, as if the killer was learning with every strike. The people of Brookhaven no longer asked if he would kill again. They only wondered when. Then came September. The leaves browned and curled, yet the air stayed heavy and hot. Children no longer played outdoors. They watched the roads from behind curtains, waiting for the next name to be whispered. The town now revolved around Samuel Whitlock. Every conversation, every curfew, every prayer tied to that boy and the grin that haunted them all. Even when he vanished for days, his absence hung in the air like a warning, and when he returned, another body seemed to follow. The boy who smiled while killing was gaining momentum, and Brookhaven had only begun to glimpse the depths of his depravity. By September's arrival, fear had rotted into division. Families who had shared fences for generations now glared at one another through shuttered windows, suspicion festering as deep as grief. The murders of Thomas, Abigail, and Henry had turned daily life into ritualized paranoia. Neighbors no longer waved from fields. Men no longer gathered in taverns after long harvest days. Conversation had narrowed to one name, Samuel Whitlock, and even there the town splintered. Some demanded Sheriff Turner arrest him, evidence or not. Others whispered that nothing short of death would stop him. A few urged restraint, warning that if the town pushed him too far, if their anger spilled over, it might unleash something far worse, a massacre that no one could contain. Turner listened to every side, and the weight of it hollowed him. Sleep eluded him. Most nights, he sat on his porch with his revolver resting across his knees, staring out at the fields shimmering under the moon, haunted by the same question that gnawed at every mind in Brookhaven's: when will he strike again? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. On the evening of September 10th, the Miller family gathered for supper in their modest farmhouse. As the meal was laid out, their youngest daughter, Clara, aged 10, failed to return from fetching water at the well. At first, her mother assumed she was dawdling. But as the minutes stretched on, unease turned to terror. Lanterns were lit, voices shouted her name into the dark, and within the hour, half the neighbors joined the search. It didn't take long. Clara's body was found near the well, hidden in the tall grass, her white dress soaked in crimson. Etched into her chest was the same crude, smiling curve, Samuel's signature. But this time, he hadn't disappeared into the night unseen. 2 teenage boys swore they'd spotted him minutes before Clara vanished, his thin frame outlined against the sunset, that dreadful grin fixed on his face. It wasn't enough to prove guilt in court, but to the people of Brookhaven, it was all they needed. That night, rage boiled over. Dozens gathered outside the courthouse, voices rising like a storm. Fathers stood with fists clenched, mothers pale and trembling beside them, and young men arrived armed with rifles slung across their shoulders. The air pulsed with rage and desperation as the crowd outside the courthouse roared Samuel's name like a curse, demanding that the sheriff finally take action. Some called for justice under the law, but most wanted blood. Inside his dimly lit office, Sheriff Turner paced the floor, torn between his duty and the fury rising outside. He longed to lock Samuel behind iron bars forever, yet the law gave him nothing to hold the boy on. Without proof, an arrest would crumble in court, and worse, it could feed the twisted notoriety Samuel seemed to relish. Still, Turner knew that doing nothing was just as dangerous. If the townsfolk lost faith in the law, they would take justice into their own hands, and once a mob formed, vengeance, not truth, would rule the night. When he stepped outside to face the crowd, his voice strained over the chaos. "The law will prevail," he shouted, sweat glistening beneath his hat in the torchlight. But his words were drowned by angry cries. "The law's too slow! That boy's not one of us! How many more must die?" Brookhaven had split in two, those still clinging to order, and those who believed evil demanded its own kind of justice. And without raising a single hand, Samuel Whitlock had turned the town against itself. 2 days after young Clara Miller was buried, Samuel appeared once more, this time at the market. He stood silently near the well, watching the mourning women as they whispered through tears. Then, as if mocking their grief. He pressed 2 fingers to his lips and stretched them into that same ghastly grin carved into his victims. The women gasped and fled, leaving their baskets behind as Samuel walked away, slow and deliberate, his shadow cutting long across the cobblestones. He wanted their fear, he lived on it. Evil, they say, hides in darkness, but in Brookhaven, 1897, it smiled in broad daylight. And as the town fractured, Samuel wasn't just killing children anymore, he was killing their faith, their safety, and their trust in one another. The smile was spreading, and by October, it would consume them all. October came cool, but there was no relief for Brookhaven. Gone were the harvest dances and fiddle songs, the town was steeped in dread. 4 children were already dead, and each funeral made the Missouri soil heavier, burdened by grief and the certainty that Samuel would strike again. Every creak of a door, every crunch of gravel in the dark made hearts freeze. Families locked themselves inside before dusk, hoping fragile walls could keep the evil out. Even the church pews sat empty, the faithful too afraid to gather. Yet Samuel was always there, seen leaning against posts on Main Street, or standing silent in the fields where children once played. Wherever he appeared, that smile followed, cold, taunting, unblinking. Brookhaven was crumbling, and Samuel knew it. Then came the next blow. On October 14th, 13-year-old Ruth Callahan went out to deliver bread to a neighbor and never returned. At dawn, they found her body near the churchyard, almost exactly where Thomas Green had been discovered months before. The same wounds, the same dreadful carving, but this time, the bread she had carried lay beside her, neatly sliced, as though mocking the meal she'd never share again. Samuel didn't just kill, he performed. Every death was a message, a symbol. Sheriff Turner stood over Ruth's body, revolver heavy in his hand, his face drained of color. For the first time, he saw it clearly. Samuel wasn't committing random murders, he was crafting scenes, each one a taunt, a challenge. Later that day, Turner gathered the townspeople before the courthouse. His voice trembled but held firm. "I don't care if he's a boy. I don't care what the law says. If we do nothing, more children will die." But his words came too late. The crowd erupted again, half demanding Samuel's execution without trial, half begging to preserve the law even as they trembled with fear. Turner silenced them only by shouting over the chaos, his final words cutting through the noise. "If the law won't stop him soon, I will." That night, revolver at his side, Turner patrolled the town's edge alone. Under the thin glow of the moon, he spotted Samuel standing in the field near the Miller home. The boy's thin frame swayed slightly, his face hidden until Turner drew closer. Then Samuel turned, that haunting grin glimmering pale in the moonlight. Turner raised his gun, hands shaking, but Samuel only tilted his head and began to laugh, a low, rasping sound that crawled through the dark. "You're too late," he whispered. "You'll always be too late." Then he stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Turner stood frozen, realizing what the rest of Brookhaven refused to see. This would not end with sermons or laws. Samuel wouldn't stop, unless someone stopped him first. Brookhaven balanced on a razor's edge. No parent let a child wander alone in daylight, much less at dusk. Men kept vigil with shotguns cradled across their knees, and whispers of leaving town fluttered through doorways as families considered escape. The town itself was changing, shifting from a sleepy hamlet to something darker, consumed by the murders that had hollowed out its peace. And at the center of it all was Samuel Whitlock, the untouchable boy who seemed to be composing every cruel note. By the end of October, the strain would snap, not from sorrow alone, nor from terror, but from fury. The murmurs that had once circled Samuel's name became open curses on the wind. Autumn should have brought harvest revels, bonfires, cider and fiddles, but in 1897 Brookhaven's nights were mute. Where laughter once rose now sat a constant dread. Ruth Callahan's grave had left the town a tinderbox. No lawman could prove the boy's guilt in court, yet everyone had seen the grin, felt his stare, and heard his taunting. 3 and counting. Now there were 4 dead, and the smile carved into flesh made the link undeniable. He was not hiding, he was daring them. The rift in town deepened. One faction, hard men with field-hardened hands and liquor in their throats, met in barns at night, their voices rough with grief and a single, bitter resolve. The sheriff was weak. Waiting for evidence meant inviting more children to die. "We've got enough proof," they told anyone who would listen. "He smiles while our children rot." Others clung to law and warned of lynchings as spirals, and how quick bloodshed spreads beyond its intended aim. Yet even their warnings trembled with fear that local justice might not be enough to contain what Samuel had brought. Sheriff Elias Turner stood between these currents, bearing more weight each day, a man fraying at the seams. He still heard Samuel's laughing whisper under the moon, "You'll always be too late," and feared the boy had moved beyond mere killing. He seemed to be predicting and outpacing them, one step ahead, savoring their helplessness. By mid-October, the whispers turned into plans. Groups of men openly carried weapons by day. Farmers came to Sunday service with shotguns propped against pews. Boys who once played marbles now filed away to sharpen knives, imitating their father's grim determination. Mothers formed prayer circles and pressed Father O'Connell for guidance. His sermons, once meant to comfort, had grown harsh and urgent. "Evil walks among us," he preached, "and if the law will not act, then God's hand must guide ours." To some that sounded like a holy sanction. To others it was the priest's voice cracking under the same fear as the rest. Samuel fanned those flames with relish. Witnesses began to see him openly, perched on the store steps carving crude wooden figures with a pocket knife, leaving them on porches like grotesque calling cards. Faces stretched into impossible smiles, the same grin that haunted their nightmares. Children found those carvings and wept. One family discovered a small wooden coffin with a smile incised on its lid, and 3 days later their 10-year-old Mary vanished, her body never recovered. That disappearance broke whatever restraint remained. On October 20th, the men of Brook Haven gathered in the square under torchlight, rifles slung and tempers flaring, calling their assembly justice though it smelled of vengeance. From the courthouse steps, Turner tried to reason with them, hand on his revolver, voice cracking as he begged, "You can't take the law into your own hands." The crowd only answered with fury. "He's laughing at us. He's killing our children. We'll hang him before the week is out." The town had ceased debating. It was a civil fracture, and Samuel stood at its center, smiling as their unity split wide. That very night a torch-bearing mob set out for the Whitlock farmhouse, a rolling column of neighbors and fathers and sons moving along the lane, their silhouettes black against the horizon. From porches frightened families watched, torn between dread and the grim hope that the boy might finally be stopped. Inside the Whitlock home, Martha had known misery long before the mob. Hollowed by years of single motherhood, she'd defended Samuel with trembling lips when forced. Though her eyes always betrayed the truth, she feared him. Now, lantern light shivering across her lined face, she watched the glow of torches approach and felt the terrible thing she had been dreading. Samuel sat at the kitchen table with a half-loaf of bread beside him, idly drawing the blade of a knife across the wood, gouging slow, deliberate cuts. He didn't react to the growing noise. He only smiled, the steel scraping a rhythm into the table's surface. Martha's voice was raw as she pleaded with him, words choked by years of exhaustion and a mother's frantic hope that somehow, finally, he might relent. But Samuel only listened, calm and distant, that unchanging grin curving wider as the mob's shadows lengthened outside. Her voice cut through the chaos, trembling but fierce.
"Samuel, please do something!"
"You have to leave." Panic sharpened her words. Samuel slowly raised his head, eyes glinting under the dull lamplight, his grin fixed and unbroken. "They'll come," he murmured, voice eerily calm. Then, leaning back in his chair, arms folded like a man awaiting company, he added, "And I'll be ready." Martha's legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed to the wooden floor, her frail frame racked by sobs. Between gasps she pleaded with her son to repent, to flee, to surrender. But Samuel only tilted his head, watching her with detached curiosity, like an insect pinned beneath glass. His voice fell to a whisper, soft but chilling. "I don't run," he said. "I smile." That night, the mob reached the Whitlock farmhouse. Torches flickered in the cold wind, the hiss of flames mixing with angry shouts and the crunch of boots across the dirt. The air was thick with fury. They called his name again and again, not as one calls to a boy, but to summon a monster hiding in the dark. Yet Samuel didn't look out through the window. He didn't hide. He opened the door and stepped outside, his thin, pale figure framed by the orange light, his mouth curled into that familiar grin, his eyes glinting like wet glass. Stones were thrown, curses hurled, guns raised, but Samuel didn't flinch. He just stood there, smiling, calm as a spectre. For a brief, haunting moment, the mob fell silent. Their hatred faltered in the face of a boy so unafraid of death. Then Samuel spoke, quietly, almost to himself. Only those nearest could hear. "You think this ends with me?" he whispered. The words slid through the crowd like poison, sowing doubt where vengeance had burned. He smiled wider. In that instant, they all understood. Samuel wasn't losing. He had already won. The October air crackled with heat and smoke. Brookhaven had crossed the point of no return. What began as whispers and warnings had turned into a storm that no preacher, no sheriff, no prayer could stop. The farmhouse loomed in the firelight, a skeleton of wood and shadow. Men screamed Samuel's name, torches trembling in their hands. Women wept and cursed, clutching one another in grief. Then Samuel emerged again, calm, almost regal in the glow of the burning light. He didn't beg. He didn't flee. He simply walked forward, the fire dancing on his skin, that grin carved deep into his face. Even the angriest among them hesitated. For a heartbeat they saw not a killer, but a boy staring down death as if he'd invited it. The silence was suffocating. The torches hissed. The mob's fury broke under its own weight. Samuel tilted his head slightly, his thin shoulders rising in a quiet laugh that never escaped his throat. That tiny motion was enough to shatter what little control remained.
Hang him?
Someone bellowed. Kill him now! Another echoed. The torches surged forward, fists raised, the mob pressing closer. Still, Samuel didn't move. He stepped off the porch and into the ring of firelight, his eyes sweeping over them, over the fathers of the children he'd taken, over the women hollowed by loss. Then, with a voice soft but deadly clear, he spoke. "You'll never forget me." The words were calm, deliberate, and they struck harder than any bullet. "You think it ends when I hang?" he said, smiling wider. "No, you'll see me every night. In your homes. In your barns. In your prayers." His head tilted, shadows twisting his face into something almost inhuman. "Even if I die, I already live here." He tapped his temple. "In your thoughts. In your fears. I've already won." It was madness and genius. The crowd wavered. Some lunged forward in rage. Others recoiled, shaken by his words. Torches swung wildly. Rifles quivered. Sheriff Turner shouted for calm, slamming his revolver into the dirt.
Stop this!
"Stop it now," he cried, but his voice drowned in the chaos. Then came the breaking point. A shot tore through the night, this time not into the sky. Brookhaven erupted. Men turned on one another, screaming. "If Turner won't hang him, we will," shouted one. "And curse us all with his blood." Another roared back. Shouts became shoves. Shoves turned to blows, and the mob splintered apart in front of the grinning boy, who watched them unravel. His smile cut through the dark like a blade catching the firelight. Sheriff Turner fought to regain control, his commands swallowed by rage and panic. Martha Whitlock screamed from the porch, her thin voice cracking as she begged them to stop, but her cries vanished into the chaos. And as Brookhaven tore itself apart beneath the October moon, Samuel Whitlock stood untouched at the center of it all, grinning, calm, and victorious. The shot cracked like thunder through the crowd, rolling over the fields and turning the mob into a chaos of gasps and screams. A man stumbled back, hands clutching his chest before collapsing into the dirt. A father of three fell not by Samuel's hand but by the town's own fury. Panic surged. More guns barked. Men toppled one another. A torch smashed against the farmhouse wall and dry timber drank the flames hungrily. Women screamed, dragging husbands away from the frenzy as smoke and shouts braided into a terrifying roar. Through the smoke and confusion, Sheriff Turner lunged into the fray and seized Samuel's slender arm, hauling him from the burning house with an iron grip. Samuel tilted his face up to him, grin as placid as ever, and whispered through the cacophony, "You see, I don't need to kill them. They'll do it for me." Turner felt the blood run cold. In that instant he was not the hunter of a murderer, but a player in the boy's wicked design. The mob scattered as the farmhouse became an inferno. The men carrying the dead farther back toward town, with their faces white and voices broken. Their righteous anger curdled into horror at what they'd become. By dawn, Brookhaven lay in pieces, friendships and trust battered, the sheriff's authority smoldering like the blackened beams of the Whitlock home, and Samuel, alive, walked beside Turner into town with hands unbound, his pace slow, his smile wider than ever, as if to say, "I did not lift a hand, you destroyed yourselves for me." The townsfolk fell silent as the procession passed. Some spat, some pressed children closer, many averted their eyes, ashamed and afraid. And Turner marched the boy to the jail and shut the iron door, yet found no comfort in the lock. Samuel sat cross-legged on the bunk, leaning back as if the cell were merely another stage, his grin blooming at every glance the sheriff cast through the bars. Turner tried paperwork, drank bitter coffee, paced. Every time he looked into that smile it gnawed at him. As dusk blowed into evening he finally spoke the question that had hollowed him. Why Samuel? Why them? Why the children? The boy toyed with a straw, eyes distant, then tilted his head and smiled as if revealing the simplest truth. Because they scream better. The words slid over Turner like ice. Samuel continued, voice flat and chilling. Adults fight. They make noise. They resist. Children give fear honestly. Turner slammed his fist on the cell door. You're a coward hiding behind grins, he spat. Samuel's gaze sharpened, but the smile never left. And yet, Sheriff, I decide who sleeps and who does not. You can't stop me. None of you can. That's why you burn your own houses down before you touch me. That's why you fight each other. Turner turned away, jaw clenched until his teeth ached. Because it was true. Brookhaven unspooled itself, and the powerless boy sat at its center pulling strings. Night after night Turner sat alone in his office with the lamps guttering down, the town in tatters, and the awful certainty that more children would die unless he acted. He had sworn to uphold the law, but the law now stood between a monster and innocent lives. For the first time since he'd taken the badge, Turner considered becoming executioner rather than keeper of statutes. Imagining the cold finality of pressing a revolver to Samuel's temple and ending the nightmare in a single, irreversible pull. The image flashed before his eyes again and again, quick and merciful, the smile gone forever. But each time his hand crept toward the gun it froze, stopped by the same hard truths he could not unmake the oath he'd taken, the law he swore to protect, and the knowledge that even if he killed the boy, the town's bloodied soul might never heal. And worse, that such an act would make him no different from the mob that had consumed itself in Samuel's name, something else gnawing deeper. Fear, not fear of killing, no. Fear of what that boy would do in his final moments. Would Samuel laugh at him as the bullet left the chamber? Would his last glance prove him right that even in death he had already won? Elias Turner felt himself shrinking under the shadow of a 14-year-old boy. Meanwhile, the people of Brookhaven didn't sleep. Fathers paced floors with rifles tense in hand. Mothers clutched children to their sides. Neighbors avoided one another, each privately swallowing dread. The mob's failed justice had only worsened matters. They had not destroyed the evil. They had fed it, letting Samuel relish in both the fire and the division. Whispers spread that locking him behind iron would not hold him, that the grin would find a way to slip through bars, that someone else's child would be next, no matter how many locks and rifles stood guard. One woman, Mrs. Dale, the same who once confronted Samuel in public, stormed to the sheriff's office under moonlight, demanding to see him. She slammed her palms against Turner's desk, eyes wide with desperation. You kill him, Sheriff. If the law won't allow it, break the law. For God's sake, do it before another grave is dug. Her words carried the weight of every mother in Brookhaven. Turner swallowed hard, unable to look her squarely in the eyes because he wanted to. More than anything, he wanted to, but still his finger shook away from the revolver's trigger. Samuel's smile haunted him, a reminder of how deeply the boy had taken root in his mind. On the third day, behind bars, Samuel acted. In the early morning, as Turner unlocked the office door, he heard humming. Low, steady, sharp as a razor under breath, Samuel sat in the cell, knees bent, tapping a rhythm against the floorboards with his heel. The tune was faint, but recognizable. It was the simple melody sung at Brookhaven funerals, the hymn every grieving family had heard as small coffins lowered into the ground. Turner froze as it echoed. Every note was struck with icy precision, and through it all that grin stretched over Samuel's face. Do you hear them crying, Sheriff? Samuel asked softly, his tone like silk sliding over broken glass. They'll cry again soon. The sheriff's breath snapped heavy. With one step, he crossed the room, fists wrapped around the bars. Not if I put you in the ground first. Then do it, Samuel whispered, leaning forward until his eyes gleamed inches away. But when you pull the trigger, ask yourself, did you kill me to save them or to save yourself from me? The words dug deep. Turner stumbled back, revolver half drawn, and stopped again. Samuel leaned against the wall, humming once more, the grin carved so deep it might as well have been branded onto his face. That night, Turner sat again, staring at his revolver, the weight heavier than steel. He could end it. One bullet, silence at last. But another voice gnawed through his mind, Samuel's voice. Even if I die now, I already live here, and Turner began to fear the truth. That Samuel was right. Killing him might not end the horror. Killing him might only make the smile eternal. Brookhaven continued to fracture. Some demanded Samuel's death. Others claimed killing him would curse the town forever. Families turned against one another, more divided than at any point before. All while Samuel lay in wait, humming his funeral tune, smiling at the bars that should have made him powerless, but only seemed to make him stronger. The sheriff stood at his breaking point. The choice was no longer between law and justice. It was between sanity and surrender, between the badge and the gun, and soon Elias Turner would decide. The cell door rattled in the night as Samuel shifted on his bunk, humming the same funeral hymn that had tormented the sheriff for days. The sound carried through the narrow jailhouse, threading into the silence of Brookhaven like a poisoned lullaby. No one slept anymore. Even those who didn't hear the hymn swore they felt it, an echo of death moving in the air. Sheriff Elias Turner sat in his office, hat off, head bowed low, revolver on the desk before him. The lamplight flickered against the walls, painting long shadows like bars across the wood. His eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, his mind torn between duty and desperation. The boy had broken him, not with fists, not with knives, but with words, with smiles, with the certainty of coming death. The people of Brookhaven had stopped speaking about if Samuel would kill again. They spoke only of when and who. Mothers clutched their children closer than ever. Fathers kept weapons cocked and polished, but there was no peace to be found. The town had already lost 5 lives, maybe more, and each morning arrived with the same question. Who would be next? Turner could feel it in his bones. If Samuel remained alive, another coffin would soon join the others. But still, the sheriff hesitated. On the 4th night of Samuel's imprisonment, Turner awoke from a dreamless half-sleep at his desk to a sound that froze the blood in his veins. Laughter. It was soft at first, drifting from the cell like a chill breeze. But it thickened, grew sharper, filled with something guttural that rattled in the throat of the boy behind bars. It wasn't joyous laughter. It was cruel, deliberate, mocking, the sound of someone savoring the unraveling of another man's mind. Turner gripped his revolver, stumbling to his feet, slamming the office door open. Samuel sat upright on the bunk, shoulders shaking in mirth, his grin so wide it looked carved into flesh. "What are you laughing at?" Turner demanded, voice cracking. Samuel dragged his hand across his mouth, barely stifling his chuckles before replying in a voice low and venomous. "At you." He leaned forward, his face pressed close to the bars. "You sit here night after night, revolver always by your hand, whispering to yourself that you'll end me. But you won't. You can't, because deep down you know even if this body dies, I've already planted myself in you." "Stop," Turner snapped, slamming the butt of his gun against the bars. "Just stop." But Samuel's smile only widened. "Tell me, Sheriff, how many times have you pictured pulling that trigger?" Whispers that hissed through Brookhaven like wind through broken glass. Samuel's behind bars. Some muttered, trembling, "So how?" Others whispered darker things, that the devil didn't need walls, that Samuel's curse had slipped beyond his flesh, that the smile now belonged to the town itself. Sheriff Turner stood at the edge of the churchyard, snow gathering on his hat brim, his breath clouding before him. The child hung beneath the oak, small boots brushing the frozen ground, blood black against the pale morning. The carved word, TRNR, glared up from the boy's chest like an accusation etched by God himself. His deputy retched behind him. Mothers wept openly. Turner couldn't move. His revolver felt fused to his side. He knew Samuel hadn't left his cell. He'd checked it himself not an hour before. The boy still sat cross-legged on the cot, humming that same funeral tune, eyes bright, lips split wide in that impossible smile. But someone, something, had carried out his will. By sundown, the town's whispers turned to shouts. Men crowded outside the jailhouse, torches raised, demanding Samuel's death.
"He's killing us from inside those bars!"
One screamed. "Ned it tonight, Sheriff, or we will." Turner stepped outside, face gray, voice hoarse. He's been locked up. You'll only hang another innocent if you go looking for monsters in the dark. But even as he spoke, he saw it. The doubt twisting in their eyes, the hunger for blood, the same fever that had burned them once before. Brookhaven was circling back to the fire. Inside the cell, Samuel sat in the half-light humming. As Turner entered, the boy's tune softened into a whisper. 6, Samuel said quietly. That's 6 graves now. You keep count, don't you? Turner's throat tightened. How did you do it? Samuel tilted his head, grinned slow and patient. You still think I do things, Sheriff. But I only speak, you do the rest. The town listens, the town obeys. Turner's voice broke into a growl. You carved that boy. You wrote my name. Samuel laughed lightly, a sound that rattled against the walls like coins in a tin. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But it's fitting, isn't it? You carry me inside you, Elias, and now the town knows. The sheriff slammed his hands against the bars, rage clawing at his ribs. You think this ends with me? Samuel leaned forward, eyes bright as frost. It already did. The moment you hesitated. Turner stumbled back. For the first time he felt it fully. The boy was right. Samuel's death would change nothing. The town's rot ran deeper now, spreading like roots from his smile. Outside, the mob grew louder. Glass shattered, boots thundered. Turner glanced to the door, then back to Samuel. The boy was still smiling, calm, waiting. Go on, Samuel whispered. Let them in. They'll finish what you couldn't. They'll burn me, and themselves, all over again. Turner raised his revolver, eyes wild. But for once, Samuel didn't flinch. He just whispered, almost tenderly. Either way, Sheriff, the fire's already lit.